I'm Emily Mashak, and you're listening to Tuned Into NoCo, Town Square Media's show that lets you know what matters in NoCo. I'm talking today with Liz Means, the Early Childhood Mental Health Program Manager with the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County, and Dr. Buffy Trent Wolf, a psychologist and early childhood mental health expert. And we're here to talk about parenting in a pandemic, something that has been on everyone's minds lately. So thank you so much for joining me today, ladies.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Now, before we get into the topic at hand, let's rewind a little bit. For those who are unfamiliar, what is the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County?
Yeah, so the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County is a 501c3 tax-exempt organization located in Fort Collins, Colorado, and we receive a large portion of our funding from the Office of Early Childhood. Our mission is to bring the community together to share knowledge and resources, build expertise, and work collaboratively to ensure that all young children, especially those at the highest risk for adversity, have the care, support, opportunities, and resources necessary to grow, learn, and succeed. And I would say that our work focuses on providing a variety of services related to early childhood, things that support providers. So we are a systems level partner. We provide services like coaching for early care and education centers, professional development and training opportunities on a variety of early childhood topics, and career pathway counseling and things like that. Our programs are focused on early care and education and early childhood mental health. And both of those programs focus on workforce development, advocacy and outreach, and systems integration, which means we're kind of doing a little bit of everything when it comes to the early childhood system. Our main focus right now, I would say, is on that workforce development piece and outreach and advocacy and acting as a community connector. So bringing people together to make sure that any work that's being done in the early childhood field isn't being done in a silo and isn't being duplicative of other projects that are going on in the community.
Right. Now, how did each of you find your way to either the Early Childhood Council or in general, the field of childhood welfare? Like, what got you interested in your careers today?
So like you already said, Emily, I'm a clinical psychologist, and me finding the field of infant and early childhood mental health was kind of a happy accident. I had no idea that this field existed when I was in my training, which is kind of a systemic problem, I think, with training, is that we don't tend to talk about it a lot, which is something that needs to change because early childhood mental health is really important. But when I was in my practicums, I got kind of randomly placed in a hospital setting doing evaluations for babies, for infants who had recently been discharged from the NICU. And when I got that placement, I thought, what? How do you even evaluate a baby? What is this? But I loved it. And I honestly found my passion, and I continued to research and seek out additional training opportunities. Ended up doing a fellowship in early childhood mental health at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and have really created a niche. And since I arrived in Fort Collins a few years back, I connected with Liz and the Early Childhood Council because they're doing such amazing work in this area in our community. And since then, I've kind of partnered with them here and there, doing different trainings and writing supervision and doing groups and things like that. But yeah, it's been a wonderful relationship meeting them and supporting early childhood in our community.
That is awesome. And how about you, Liz? What drew you to the ECCLC?
Yeah, it was kind of a happy accident for me too, ending up in early childhood. It wasn't it's something I was really interested in right off the bat. I had been more involved in like environmental nonprofit work, event planning, and program coordination. And so when I got hired on, it was to help run the LEAP Coalition for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health. And LEAP was a truly grassroots coalition of multiple agencies from around the county that had come together a few years back just to talk about early childhood mental health and say, hey, what is going on with this? Who's doing what? And how can we do more in this area? And that coalition, it was really the seed of what has grown and evolved into the early childhood mental health program at the council. And so I didn't know I wanted to be in early childhood, but as I've gotten more into it, I've seen how important early childhood is to lifelong outcomes, and that it really is prevention at its prime. So if you are wanting to prevent future mental health, substance use, or really almost any other problem or challenge that we see as a society, you can start in early childhood and find a lot of those roots there.
That was actually my next question. You kind of jumped into it. I was going to ask, why is a focus on early childhood so important? But on top of that, what does a healthy early childhood look like?
Yeah, I think, a buzzword that I always come back to when we're thinking about early childhood, or I guess a buzz phrase, is relationships matter. I think, the single most common factor that we see in children who end up doing well, even despite early adversity, early stress, is the presence of at least one supportive, responsive adult in their life, at least one good relationship, right? So that's so strong. So when I think about what does healthy early childhood look like, honestly, it looks like healthy relationships.
I would second that. Relationships and environments are really like the two key terms that you are going to hear for healthy early childhood. So that's relationships with your earliest connections, your caregivers, and then what kind of environment you're growing up in and what your first experiences are like. If they are somewhat unstable, unhealthy, unsafe, that's what we try to avoid. But like Buffy said, having that support of a caring, nurturing adult can really buffer young children from the stress of growing up in adverse experiences or environments. And so it really does come back to relationships. We know that a lifetime of mental health and success begins in early childhood, and that children who grow up in environments that are unsafe, challenging, where they experience abuse or neglect, they are much more likely to experience challenges throughout their entire life. And that can be physical, mental, and social emotional. So like the Adverse Childhood Experiences study outlined how the more adversity you experience in early childhood directly correlates with how much adversity you live throughout your life. And that can show up in things like drug and alcohol use, depression, suicide attempts, even broken bones and things like diabetes, and actually all the way up to an early death. It's hard to overstate the importance of early childhood.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think, the early experiences just have a significant impact on lifelong health and wellness. As Liz was mentioning, physical health, but obviously social emotional health. And when we think about why those early years are so important, why is that? Why are we seeing that long-term impact? And a huge part of it is that most of our brain is developing in those first 5 years. 90% of our brain develops in early childhood before age 5, which is huge. And so what children are learning during this time is what they're taking with them throughout the rest of their lives. And most of that learning isn't conscious, right? They're not going to have a conscious memory of being cared for or soothed as an infant, but their body remembers and their brain remembers that, what they're learning about relationships and what they're learning about emotions. And what we know is that a regulated child, a child who can learn about regulation and a child who can learn about healthy relationships early on is going to have much more success as an adult when it comes to their relationships, their emotions, and just their overall well-being and functioning.
And now that we know just how important a good early childhood is, parents definitely want to do this job right, but that can be hard, especially in a challenging climate like this pandemic. So what challenges have each of you, whoever wants to jump in, seen that have really just popped up in this pandemic? Or what's been a bigger issue with the changes in our environment right now?
Yeah, I think, this is a very timely question for Liz and I, because we've been doing a parenting in a pandemic group that just had its last group this morning. So we were just talking to some parents about this and what's been coming up for them and what's been the most challenging thing they've been facing as parents. And I think something that I've heard a lot over the last nearly year, right, that we've been in this is the roller coaster that everyone's been experiencing. A lot of it is a roller coaster of ambiguity. Like, are we have to stay home now, or school's going to open? What's the summer going to look like? The schools are closing again. Just a lot of these changes and hard to adjust to anything. And I think that ambiguity obviously creates stress for the children, but it creates a lot of stress for the parents. And so when we're talking about those relationships matter, those strong, solid, responsive relationships, when we think about a person who's stressed and overwhelmed with their own emotions and their own struggles to adjust to ambiguity, that person is having a harder time being responsive and attuned to other people, right? They're having a hard time managing their own stress. So it makes it even harder to manage the stress of their kids and to support their kids and what's going on. So I think while I've heard a lot coming up for parents in terms of concerns of the pandemic, more screen time, less access to in-person engagement with peers, I think a lot of it comes back to that stress and self-care that's really hard right now and gets in the way quite a lot in terms of responsive parenting. So that's been a huge focus of my work with parents, is that focus on what we call co-regulation, which is taking care of yourself, being able to calm yourself so that you can be there to help your child calm down when they're overwhelmed.
I feel like Buffy really summed that up beautifully and just points to the fact that there is really no early childhood mental health without caregiver or parent mental health. And so that's exactly what we've been trying to target and help people work through, is that self-care piece. And I would just add that we've run into a lot of feelings of guilt, like mom guilt, or I'll say parent guilt, feeling just like they're not able to do anything right, or not able to perform to the best of their abilities, and they feel bad about it. And I think we've had a lot of conversations around just giving ourselves some grace and some time and space, and acknowledging that we're all doing the best we can. And Buffy does a great job of bringing it back to the fact that, children are resilient, especially when they have that one supportive relationship. And even if parents can't be or don't feel like they're doing it all, as long as they're there for their kids and as long as they are providing that support for them, that's enough.
I love that. So you would say that self-care is probably really one of the biggest and most important things that parents can do during hard times like this.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think we can understate the importance of self-care. And I think this is something that always comes up for parents. It's not unique to the pandemic. I think the pandemic has heightened it and made it more challenging and caused more stress and reduced access, right, to things that people might have done for self-care in the past. So it's definitely exacerbated something that's always existed. Because I think about something that comes up for caregivers a lot is how much they love their children, right? My children come first. And of course they do. And we have to remember to put your oxygen mask on first, right? If you don't put your oxygen mask on, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your child in the way that you want to and in the way that they need you to.
Well, clearly, I'm sure we have some listeners here who are hearing this and being like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's how I feel with my kids. How can they reach out to you guys and the ECCLC to get some resources or advice or any help they may need?
For ECCLC, we encourage them to follow us on social media, check out our website. It's just ECCLC.org. Sign up for our newsletter. We send it out every week. It has a lot of resources, especially around trainings and other types of peer support groups like the Parenting in the Pandemic group that just wrapped up. We tend to have a lot of activities like that, and would love to see more parents engaged.
How about you, Buffy?
Well, I was just thinking of access to resources, because I think, self-care, obviously we can't say that enough, right? But sometimes you need extra help, and that's okay. And that's something that I think we need to help each other normalize. And, and if you're having a hard time, despite doing your best to take care of yourself, despite trying to get good sleep, eat healthy foods, get some exercise, I think that other piece is relationship and connections with others. And if you don't have those supportive relationships in your life and you need an extra helping hand, even if you do have those relationships and you need a little extra help, that's okay. And I was actually thinking, Liz, that maybe pointing them to Kayak could be a good resource for our listeners. Do you have a little blurb or something you like to say about Kayak?
Yeah, so Kayak is spelled CAYAC, and that stands for Child, Adolescent, and Young Adult Connections. It is a subgroup of the Connections program that's run through the Health District, and it is a great central location for anybody who's looking for counseling services or just needs a referral. They're not sure where to go or what they even really need. They are referral specialists. And so calling that line is good.
The website for Kayak is healthdistrict.org/kayak, CAYAC.
Well, thank you both ladies for taking all the time. Is there anything else you would like listeners to know today?
I would just like to remind all caregivers, not just parents, but all caregivers that are listening, is that you've got this, right? Like, yourself, your children, your family better than anyone else. You are the expert on you and your family. You know what you need. Take care of yourself, because you're the most important thing in your child's life. And just remember that you're doing a good enough job. It can be easy to fall prey to comparing ourselves to what we see on social media, or feeling like we're not doing the best, but remember that you're doing good enough and your child has you, and that's the most important thing.
I love that message. Thank you both so much, ladies. It was so great to talk to you, and these are very helpful tips that I know our listeners will appreciate.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Again, that was Liz Means, the Early Childhood Mental Health Program Manager with the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County, and Dr. Buffy Trent Wolf, a psychologist and early childhood mental health expert, giving their advice on how to parent during this pandemic. Learn more at ECCLC.org.